Hello everyone! This is the second part of my series on corruption in the Senate during the final decades of the Galactic Republic. If you like what I'm doing, please support the video with a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You can also support me on Patreon. It really helps and keeps me motivated. So, in the first part, I mentioned Senator Ainley Team, a shady figure who had ties to suspicious individuals from Coruscant's criminal underworld. But compared to other Grand Senators from Malastare, Ainley Team could be considered a model of an honest politician. His colleague, Senator Ax Mo, is a completely different story. The Grand Protectorate was represented in the Republic Senate by three-eyed senators. Ax Mo began his service in the capital as an aide to Senator Pax Team, who was one of the organizers of the assassination attempt on Senator Palpatine and the businessman Hego Damask, also known as Darth Plagueis. The senator ordered the political assassination of colleagues with whom he had financial disputes, a clear-cut criminal offense. However, political eliminations were commonplace. When money and words failed, a rival could be quietly sent to the next world. But Pax Team's plan failed. Palpatine dealt with him in 52 BBY, and Ax Mo took the vacant seat. The assassination attempt on Plagueis is described in detail in the novel of the same name. Ax Mo, without waiting for lobbying offers, offered his services to the Trade Federation himself. Naturally, not for free. We saw exactly how he could help the TF in The Phantom Menace. When Padme Amidala arrived at the Senate with a complaint about the armed intervention and occupation of Naboo, it was Ax Mo who sided with the TF. He urged them not to rush, to form a commission to verify the facts of the attack, and to approve the commission's composition at a session several months later. Ax Mo was dragging his feet on the issue to stall the proceedings. That was exactly what the Neimoidians were paying him for. Had it not been for the vote of no confidence in the Chancellor, the TF's paid aides would have dragged the process out for years, and anything could have been done to Naboo. But Ax Mo, without realizing it, was a mere pawn in Palpatine's scheme. The future Emperor, with the help of such senators, was increasing distrust of the Valorum. Even the secret dispatch of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to inspect the blockade played into Palpatine's hands. The great schemer did not foresee that the Jedi would survive and bring the Queen to Coruscant, but he turned even that to his advantage, as Amidala's speech proved decisive for the vote of no confidence. Shortly after Palpatine's election as Chancellor, Ax Mo traveled to Malastare for negotiations regarding the civil war on Lannik. There, he conspired with the leader of the Red Yarrow, Mikchur Finnux Zug. Had it not been for the intervention of the Jedi, particularly Even Piell, the Senator and the revolutionaries would have succeeded in orchestrating a series of assassinations to enable General Mikchur to seize power, and Ax Mo would have gained additional wealth and influence. Read the details in the Star Wars comic series, issues 12 through 16. When the Separatist crisis began, Ax Mo quickly got his bearings. Realizing that the matter would not end peacefully and that the TF leaders were unlikely to succeed, he chose the other side. The senator joined the Loyalist Committee and sided with Palpatine, calling for the creation of a pan-Republican army. His predecessor as senator, who hated Palpatine, would certainly not have approved. Ax Mo did not live to see the start of the Clone Wars. A few months before the war, he arrived on Argao to negotiate with the intergalactic banking clan regarding funding for the future army, and there he was eliminated by mercenaries. It may seem strange to negotiate with the banking clan, which had participated in the creation of the CIS, but the Moons officially remained neutral, being the Republic's main creditors. That's business, sitting on two chairs and financing both sides of the war. Over his long career, Ax Mo managed to deceive and set up so many people that many wished for his demise. They wouldn't even let him be buried in peace. Opposition Dugs disrupted the procession, speeding over it in their race vehicles. Let's move on to other examples. There was Senator Yeb Adamthorn in the Republic, representing the Nilgard sector and the planet Makum Te. He knew how to take bribes without drawing attention, but he spent them ostentatiously, buying a luxurious mansion on Coruscant that no senator's salary could have afforded. He is remembered for his sharp criticism of Resolution BR 0371. This resolution imposed a tax on trade routes in the outer and mid-rings. The Valorum and Palpatine hoped to reduce the influence of megacorporations and use the new revenue to fund social projects or reduce the national debt to the banking clan. Palpatine also had a secret goal: to increase instability. As I mentioned, due to lobbying and bribery, the influence of the Trade Federation and the Commerce Guild had grown to the point of effectively occupying planets. For example, the planet Dorvala in the Vedenda sector and the planets Lok, Nod Kartha, and Maramir in the Karthak sector. It seemed like a noble cause at first glance, raising funds and reining in the merchants. But what if we take a closer look? The tax was supposed to bring in billions, but the funds were distributed by Orn Free Ta, one of the most corrupt senators. Supporters of the law included the worlds of the core, the inner ring, and the colonies, whose regions were becoming more profitable for trade and investment. Due to the hype surrounding the bill, the core worlds began to grow richer even before the resolution was passed, while the outer rim worlds began to lose money. This became one of the reasons why entire sectors later rallied under the Confederacy's banner, as the Republic's taxes had done them more harm than the Trade Federation. The debate over the bill drew a barrage of criticism from senators in the Trade Federation's pocket. Yeb Adamthorn was receiving huge sums from the Nemoidians for lobbying, and although his protests had thoroughly annoyed the entire Senate, the resolution was passed. One of the authors was Palpatine of Naboo. To put pressure on him, the Trade Federation blockaded Naboo. In other words, it did exactly what Palpatine had been aiming for. The surly Yeb Adamthorn, acting on the Trade Federation's orders, was helping his cunning enemy, Palpatine. It must be admitted that Valorum was no saint either. There is a well-known incident on Dorvala in 33 BBY. The case involved the Nebula Front group led by Eru Metalis. They fought against monopolies and slavery, eventually forming a militarized wing of mercenaries. A group of 12 mercenaries boarded a Trade Federation transport. According to the paperwork, he was transporting ore, but the real treasure was the erodium ingots worth 2 billion credits. It was a bribe from the Outer Ring worlds in exchange for the Federation's favor. A massive sum of money, enough to build a squadron of cruisers. So you're listening to all this and probably thinking, what does Valorum and his whole family have to do with it? The fact is that a few months later, all this wealth turned up in the account of a shipping company on Eriadu owned by the Valorum family. The company was called Valorum Shipping and Transport. Moreover, the Supreme Chancellor was the company's largest shareholder and sat on the board of directors. By the way, even while holding the office of Senator or Chancellor in the Republic, it was possible to have one's own legitimate business. Naturally, the assets in the form of bullion did not arrive in the company's bank account directly. But given how the company had developed up to that point, the amount of the financial injection received could not help but be surprising. It even led to a discussion in the Investigations Committee and a closed-door court hearing, and although the case was ultimately swept under the rug, Valorum's reputation took a serious hit. Of course, one can safely say that this was an insanely expensive provocation against the Chancellor, but for some reason, the Valorum family business were in no hurry to turn down this money and did not protest particularly vigorously. Subsequently, this story backfired on the Chancellor, hastening his resignation and Palpatine's rise to power. By the way, the Valorum Transport Company gained a competitive advantage from the introduction of Resolution BR 0371, just a little abuse of office. But these aren't all the misdeeds attributed to Chancellor Finis Valorum. The Supreme Chancellor, albeit not personally, hired pirates and mercenaries to assist the Dugs and the combined forces of the Varhagen and Tyos sectors during the struggle for resources on Malastare in 34 BBY. He also persuaded a couple of Jedi to go there without informing the Senate. Naturally, the money to recruit mercenaries didn't come out of thin air. It had to have come from somewhere. Such things happened in the Republic. The fact that pirates were hired is mentioned in the encyclopedia, The Essential Guide to Warfare. Even the assassination attempt on Finis Valorum during the Clone Wars was not without corruption. In the year 21 BBY, the passenger ship Star of Iskin, on which Valorum was supposed to fly, exploded on takeoff. Although the event is not directly related to the video's topic, corruption was involved. The ship was mined by Sajay Tasha, a career assassin of the CIS. She was acting on the orders of the Dark Jedi Sora Bulk, who served Count Dooku. It would seem like a routine elimination of an enemy, but Sajay Tasha was aided by Republican Senator Viento. During the Clone Wars, he secretly worked for the Confederacy, acting as a separatist agent of influence in the Senate. For generous rewards, he worked against the Republic, sabotaging decisions with his comments and voting against them. The senator did not live to see the end of the war. Jedi Master Quinlan Vos helped bring about his demise, mistakenly believing that Viento might be a Sith. The thought that the Chancellor himself might be a Sith never crossed the Jedi's mind. The public was unaware of Viento's treason, so the senator's body was frozen in carbonite and buried with honors in a special tomb on Coruscant. I wonder how many other corrupt officials and scoundrels were buried in that tomb? It is worth noting that Finis Valorum was a complete scoundrel, and he was far from alone. Many others embezzled funds and abused their authority. Chancellor Thoris Darris, who held office from 62 to 52 BBY, was largely responsible for the atmosphere of corruption and recklessness. He brought a decadent sense of style to the capital that hadn't been seen in a long time. Darris was an incorrigible womanizer, a lover of opera, gambling, and fine dining. His first term was marked by rampant corruption. Following the example of the head of state, thousands of senators and lobbyists turned Coruscant into a haven of idleness. From all corners of the galaxy, those willing to indulge the whims of the new political elite flocked here. Thanks to the Trade Federation, goods and services flowed into Coruscant, giving rise to new fashions and forms of eccentricity. The privileged residents grew accustomed to a life of luxury and turned a blind eye to interplanetary strife, piracy, and crime. However, this debauched lifestyle was evident only to those who had access to exclusive clubs. For ordinary mortals, only one side was evident, all-consuming corruption. As is well known, the fish rots from the head down. Therefore, it is no surprise that citizens enthusiastically welcomed the arrival of Palpatine, whom they had not previously associated with corruption. This father of Nabooan democracy seemed to be the very embodiment of honor and justice. The complete restructuring of the power hierarchy and the stripping of the Senate's powers were met with jubilation. Under the Empire, the Senate became an exclusively advisory body, although those who were not naive understood that Palpatine could hardly be called an ideal, honest politician. Nevertheless, Palpatine managed to reform the mess that the Senate had been under the Republic, forcing politicians to at least occasionally remember honor. Did ordinary citizens try to fight tyranny and corruption before the Clone Wars? Yes, but not always by legal means, since the judicial system was ineffective when it came to the authorities. In Shadows of Coruscant, one can find a fairly detailed description of the activities of the Flail group. They called themselves fighters for citizens' rights. The Flail accused senators of pandering to megacorporations, allowing the sharks of capitalism to reap super profits at the expense of ordinary people. In fact, that was exactly the case. In the year 33 BBY, when accusations were raining down on Valorum, Flail militants carried out a series of attacks against the capital's infrastructure, showing no concern for the deaths of ordinary people. But instead of demonstrating the Senate's helplessness, they only provoked the discontent of ordinary citizens. Valorum did everything in his power to catch them, and as a result, the Flail leadership was eliminated by the secret police without trial or investigation. But the organization did not perish. The former smuggler Zegmon Pent became the new leader. He was able to create a lightsaber on his own and claimed to have been trained in the Jedi Order. People believed him even though he had never been a Jedi. Zegmon proposed focusing on eliminating the senators and Valorum himself, but thanks to the Jedi, these plans were thwarted. Let's summarize. The senators of the Galactic Republic took bribes, embezzled from the budget, ordered political assassinations, and consorted with criminals. Even if the Sith hadn't existed, the Republic would have slid into the Separatist crisis and war on its own. Palpatine merely hastened the inevitable. One can only speculate how it would have ended if the future Emperor hadn't intervened, as the Separatists could very well have won. I hope you enjoyed these stories about the political backstage of the Republic. Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'm interested in your opinions. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and you can support me on Patreon. All links are in the description. Thanks for watching, and see you later.